Welcome to Never Too Late for Fitness Radio, bringing baby boomers proven strategies and innovative products for getting fit, staying fit, so you can live a longer, healthier, and happier life. Here's your host, best-selling author and fitness advocate, Phil Ferriss.
This is Phil Ferriss, and welcome to our show. Never Too Late for Fitness Radio provides answers and straight talk about fitness, nutrition, and healthy lifestyles for people over 50. During each show, we talk to real health and fitness experts solving real problems with proven solutions you can apply in your day-to-day life as soon as today. Today's guest is Khazan, Ph.D., BCB, and she's a clinical psychologist, author, speaker, and performance excellence expert. She's a faculty member at Harvard Medical School, where she has taught biofeedback and mindfulness and supervised trainees since 2008. Dr. Khazan works with executives, athletes, lawyers, physicians, managers, scientists, artists, and other professionals on optimizing their health and performance. Dr. Khazan is a pioneer in mindful-based feedback. She's been invited to give keynote and conference presentations and teach workshops at national and international conferences and prestigious institutions around the world on the topics of biofeedback and mindfulness. Some of these institutions include the U.S. Navy Special Warfare, U.S. Army Special Forces, and the Stuttgart Opera and Ballet Company. Dr. Khazan is the author of the highly regarded book, Clinical Handbook of Biofeedback, a step-by-step guide to training and practice with mindfulness, published by Wiley Blackwell in May 2013. She is currently working on a new book about bringing the principles of biofeedback and mindfulness into everyday life with the goal of optimizing health and performance. So, Ina, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Phil. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, your area of specialization is mindfulness-based biofeedback. Can you explain what that is and the types of people with whom you work?
Certainly. I'll start by describing what biofeedback is and what mindfulness is separately, and I'll talk about bringing them together, and then I'll talk about the kind of people that I work with. So biofeedback is a very practical and exciting tool that people can use to improve their health and performance. Using biofeedback training, people learn to be aware of their physiological and mental functions, so things like your heart rate, your breathing. And then they train their bodies to automatically adjust these functions to achieve optimal performance. So in other words, as a result of biofeedback training, people learn to automatically activate or power up their bodies and minds to just the right level for the task or challenge that they're facing. And then once the challenge is over, to recover quickly and fully. The way biofeedback works is quite interesting. During training, people see their various physiological measurements displayed on the computer screen in real time. Measurements such as heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, finger temperature. This is accomplished using various body sensors and special biofeedback software that displays this information in real time. So people use this information as feedback and learn how to change their physiological functioning to be more helpful and more adaptive. Ultimately, people become more in tune with their bodies. They learn to self-regulate, which means that they learn to recognize when their physiological reactions are not being helpful and adjust them automatically to function optimally for the moment. Then mindfulness is another powerful tool that people use to improve their health and performance. And I see mindfulness as a way of being in the present moment with non-judgmental awareness and the ability to choose most helpful ways to respond to whatever may be happening at that moment. Many people may be aware and use mindfulness in the context of mindfulness meditation, which in itself is a very helpful tool to people. Now, in the training that I've developed, mindfulness-based biofeedback, mindfulness and biofeedback are coupled to achieve a totally new level of performance improvement. You can think of it as learning to fly an airplane with a blindfold versus with a full instrumentation on board. So biofeedback and mindfulness gives you that full access to the information you need in order to improve performance. So with biofeedback and mindfulness training, you exercise and strengthen the ability of your nervous system and your brain to produce just the right amount of physiological and emotional activation necessary for what you're doing. In other words, your body learns to power up to just the right level, and your brain learns to focus on what's most important in that moment. And then equally importantly, you learn how to power down, how to recover, so that you may be ready for the next challenge that comes your way.
Okay.
In this context, I work with people who are interested in improving their lives, whether through decreasing symptoms such as headaches, anxiety, pain, high blood pressure, or through learning to perform at their best in their jobs, in their hobbies, in their athletic endeavors. So I work with executives, athletes, lawyers, physicians, managers, anybody who is interested in learning how to live better.
Okay. Now, how did you get involved in biofeedback and mindfulness?
This was a while ago. Back in graduate school, I was studying to be a health psychologist. And during one of my early practicums, I had an option of learning biofeedback with Dr. Sacha Bellerose. I didn't know what biofeedback was, but it sounded pretty cool. So I did, wires and equipment, it sounded pretty good. I did the training and I just really enjoyed it. I loved it. And I loved it because I saw how biofeedback can help people overcome difficulties that they've been struggling with for years to no avail. Things like debilitating headaches, chronic pain, high blood pressure was not controlled by medication, and anxiety that prevented people from living their lives fully. So the beauty of biofeedback was in its effectiveness and also in how much it made sense to people and how willing they were to use the skills. It's as a psychologist, it's easy for me to say, well, do this. It's something else for the person to actually take that skill and use it in real life. So biofeedback skills are accessible and concrete, and they make a lot of sense, and people are actually able to incorporate them into their life fairly easily. So people could see what their bodies were doing internally in real time. They could learn to make real-time changes in the physiological function and then experience right away the difference that those changes produced. So you get both a feedback of what's going on with your body on the screen, but you also feel the change immediately right away, and you can correlate the two together. So you are you are taking just a few weeks of consistent practice to notice significant changes in how you feel and how you experience life. Right? So learning biofeedback was a major turning point in my professional life. And then a couple of years later, during my postdoctoral fellowship, I met Dr. Chris Germer, who became my mindfulness mentor. And learning mindfulness was the second major turning point in my professional life. So mindfulness gave me a way to enrich the biofeedback work I was doing and to help overcome most challenges that my clients encountered with biofeedback. Because mindfulness gives us a way to increase physiological and emotional awareness without judgment and without getting stuck in the unhelpful automatic reaction that we often experience in difficult situations. So most importantly, mindfulness gives us a way to place our efforts to control over things we actually have control over. So rather than trying to change our thoughts, feelings, physiological sensations, which we don't have the ability to change or turn off at will, we learn to change the way we respond to those thoughts, feelings, physiological sensations, which is something we do have control over. So as a result, we can stop getting stuck in futile efforts to control the uncontrollable, and we can stop wasting valuable physiological and emotional resources. And instead, we learn to direct those resources to making helpful changes. In other words, mindfulness allowed me and my clients to use biofeedback skills as a helpful chosen response to difficult situations without getting stuck in them.
Okay, that's a great example. Now, what I'd like to do is to start to zero in or drill down a little bit and talk about people over 50 and the types of challenges they have and how you use your strategies and approaches to help them overcome those challenges.
Great question. Let me give you a couple of examples. People over 50 tend to have more complicated lives. larger families, perhaps teenage kids, more advanced careers with more responsibility, maybe financial worries about kids' college or their own retirement, maybe older parents to take care of, as well as more concerns about their own health and staying in shape for themselves. So this means that complications in one area are that much more likely to spill over into another area. For example, imagine you're on your way to an important business meeting, and as you're about to walk out the door, you get into a fight with your spouse, and the fight remains unresolved because you have to rush off to your meeting. You don't have time to figure things out. But the fight lingers on in your mind. You can just stop thinking about it. So you might feel more agitated, more unsettled. The thoughts about the fight keep rattling around in your mind as you're getting to work. And as you get there, as you get to this meeting, it may be harder to focus on what you're saying. It may be harder to be effective in, say, your negotiation strategy. It may be harder to accomplish the goals that you've set out for yourself. In other words, you may have been really well prepared for this meeting, and you may have known exactly what you were going to do, but the spillover from the unexpected fight made it impossible to perform optimally during this important meeting. So that's this spillover is one way that these kinds of reactions may be unhelpful. And then people over 50 are also more likely to experience some uncomfortable physiological sensations that may stop them from engaging in physical activity that's vital to staying healthy. So people might feel a little bit more winded during exercise or experience random aches and pains. And it may feel harder to recover after physical exertion. So with age, our bodies do have a little more trouble regulating themselves. It may take more time for our bodies to adjust to the changes in level of physical activity we engage in. With mindfulness-based biofeedback, I train people in two fundamental ways. One is I help you develop a foundation for better self-regulation and optimal activation so that your mind and body are working in the background to support your ability to perform in a challenging situation and adapt more quickly to a changing environment or changing level of activity. This training happens during neutral times. It's like a workout for your brain and for your nervous system, the same way as you work out, as you do a strength training workout at the gym, you do a workout for your brain and your nervous system. And as long as you train consistently, your body and your mind learn to regulate optimally without your conscious awareness. That you increase the ability of your mind and your body to work for you without you having to do anything about it in the moment. And then in the second stream, I help people develop biofeedback and mindfulness-based skills that you can use in the moment of increased challenge to further aid that fundamental ability to self-regulate. So these are quick step-by-step skills you can practice initially during neutral times and then during challenging times. So these skills are always available to you when you most need them.
Maybe it'd be helpful if you took one specific, maybe that example of the spillover effect where you're prepared for a meeting and then you show up, and because you're distracted emotionally, physiologically from the argument with the spouse, your ability to focus in the meeting is dissipated and you're less effective. If you could talk a little bit about specific, how would you work with someone like that so that they either don't get into it, or if they show up at the meeting and they realize, oh geez, I'm not focused, how would they recenter themselves so that they could get the optimal performance during the meeting? So if you give you some specific examples of what you might do with someone that had that issue and how you've worked with them.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first thing I would do when working with a person in a situation like that is to do what's called a psychophysiological assessment using biofeedback. So we use biofeedback to learn about your body functions during neutral times, during stressful times, and during recovery times. So this is an assessment that covers the whole gamut of different stressful and recovery situations. And we learn what happens to your ability to self-regulate in those neutral times and, under mild stressors. And then also when stressors kind of pile up, how are you able to recover after the stressors, or does that unnecessary activation linger on and then spill over into subsequent activities? So based on the
Can I just interject here? When you say the stressors, what would I be specifically looking at, or what specific pieces of feedback would I be looking for in biofeedback that would say, oh, this has changed because of this stressful incident. The more specific I can get, so I can visualize, okay, I'm stressed now. What are the indicators that are telling me that I'm stressed? And then if I become more under control, what would those indicators be, and how would I see them in a training session?
Mm-hmm. So some of this is going to be that background stuff that we're going to help you train under neutral times, and that may be something like your heart rate variability, which is the difference in time that passes from heartbeat to heartbeat. And heart rate variability is a very important indicator of our body's ability to regulate itself. Heart rate variability drives that optimal activation and the break to the way that your body is functioning at any given moment. So this psychophysiological assessment will tell us, what is your heart rate variability doing? Is your autonomic nervous system strong enough to provide just the optimal level of activation and put on the brakes appropriately when you've achieved that optimal level of activation? With biofeedback training, you would learn to increase your heart rate variability overall at all times, so that it's working for you in the background. So when life throws those unexpected fights at you, and you have to be focused and steady and present for the meeting, it's easier to find that optimal level of activation, and it's easier to stay steady. On the other hand, you also learn to recognize, I am perhaps becoming a little bit overly activated, or my body is not quite working with me at this moment. So one example may be breathing related. When people become stressed, they're very frequently do what's called overbreathing, meaning that they breathe out too much carbon dioxide, which strangely enough interferes with distribution of oxygen. Most people think of carbon dioxide as something that's bad for them and they need to get rid of. And in fact, we need to retain a majority of our carbon dioxide, about 85% of it, in order to provide regulation for our pH level, or the balance between acidity and alkalinity in the body. When the pH level is thrown off, then oxygen delivery is compromised. So if you breathe out too much CO2, it makes your pH level too acidic, and then the oxygen that is going around in your bloodstream does not get released sufficiently to, say, your brain, your muscles, other major organs. So when overbreathing happens as a result of a stressful event in the moment, you're compromising delivery of blood and oxygen to your brain, and it may be really hard to think straight. You might feel lightheaded. You might feel really agitated. It might be really hard to focus. It might be hard to find your next word. It might be hard to figure out what is it that you were hoping to do in this meeting at all. And this is a quite common consequence of an unhelpful stress activation in the moment. So with someone like the person I described now, who might get thrown off by unexpected challenges coming their way in a meeting, I would absolutely be paying attention to their breathing. And if we find overbreathing, which, as I said, does happen quite often, I would be teaching them ways to recognize overbreathing in that moment. This is what it feels like. So I might make them overbreathe, in the session with me in a safe way, and then teach them how to balance their breathing. That would then deliver proper and optimal amounts of oxygen to their brain, and know how to do that in stressful situations in order to be able to perform optimally. Okay,
so you're getting them to recognize types of situations that they may be in where their body isn't working optimally. And in a safe environment in your sessions, you kind of create that a little bit so they can recognize it in themselves. It's like, oh, here are the cues that let me know that my body's starting to go suboptimally.
That's right.
And so once I can recognize that in myself, I'm aware that it's something I can control. And then you give them some techniques that will allow them to reel back the suboptimizations, if you will, and put them more in a centered stage so that they can optimally perform again. So if they don't have that recognition that they're kind of moving outside that zone that's for optimal performance, it will continue to go out there because they'll think, well, I'm just having a bad day, as opposed to check your breathing, check this, check that. And by going through that, they become in control, which goes back to your, flying an airplane. You're moving the knobs and dials as opposed to it being on autopilot on some subconscious level. You're aware, and you can manipulate the dial so that your body is where it needs to be. Is that a pretty good summary?
Absolutely. It is an excellent summary. Yes. And with particularly mindfulness-based biofeedback, you are able to then place your efforts to control where you have control, right? Because in the situation where you might feel unfocused, might be having trouble concentrating, trouble finding your words, a lot of people would focus on, oh no, I got to get myself under control. I got to stop feeling so anxious. I got to stop feeling dizzy. So they're bringing their attention on what is not immediately under their control, and they're fighting, and they're getting stuck in that futile fight with something that they can't change right at that moment. But with concrete biofeedback skills, as you said, check this, check that, here's your dial, here's the knob to turn. You have very concrete skills to which you can turn. Okay, when I feel like this, what I have control over is bringing my attention to my breathing, and this is how I bring attention to my breathing, and this is what I do with my breathing without fighting with anything, especially things that are out of your control. So then you're able to work on that underlying physiological mechanisms that once they are balanced, return you to a balanced state overall, including physiologically and emotionally, and being able to now focus on what's happening in front of you.
Okay. Besides, let's say, the anxiety or loss of focus, can you give us another example that might be somewhat different that would apply to the population of over 50, perhaps in the area of either chronic pain or managing diseases? Because I know that you've had success in that area too.
Certainly. Let's say, certainly people who experience chronic pain develop certain ways of responding to that pain. And often these ways are helpful right in the immediate moment, but ultimately unproductive and unhelpful. But because they are helpful for a very short amount of time, they become reinforced and they become a habit. So, for instance, someone with chronic pain might learn to, as soon as they feel any kind of sensations of pain, they might learn to stop whatever they're doing and disengage and maybe, go lay down or, become really tense and wait for the pain to subside. But instead, because they are for one thing, stopping what they're doing, and because they are, bracing their muscles and their breathing might be changing in that moment, they're actually, they end up making the pain worse longer term. For instance, with those pains, if people are exercising and they suddenly feel something that feels out of whack or out of place, they might stop the workout, and that's certainly not in their best interest when it's related to a underlying pain condition that is not something that's urgent and emergent, of course, but I'm talking about those situations like a headache or a back pain that's been there for a long time. So with mindfulness-based biofeedback, you learn to recognize what are those unhelpful reactions that your body might be producing, and what is the unhelpful way that you tend to cope with those reactions, and then change them in the moment. So again, if you're experiencing beginnings of pain, perhaps you slow down and you pause and you observe what's going on, and you recognize the pain for what it is, and you bring your attention to your breathing, and you release your muscles as opposed to tense them, and then assess how are you able to move forward as opposed to automatically stopping yourself from the activity that you're engaging in.
And I guess an example I can relate to is a number of people I work with have arthritis. Mm-hmm. And when you first get up and start moving with arthritis, there may be some discomfort. Mm-hmm. And some people say, oh, it hurts, so I won't I'll sit down, I'll stop exercising.
That's right.
Whereas once they work through that initial discomfort, the discomfort goes away or minimizes considerably by movement. Movement actually helps.
Absolutely.
And the more you move, the better you feel. And the better you feel, the more you move, which means it will help me with my arthritis. But if I balk at it and, like you say, tense my muscles and focus on the pain, then I'm going to eliminate the normal access I have to get, improving my physical condition. And, that's one of the big reasons people say they don't exercise. Well, it's painful. But once they get through that initial, and they understand, oh, that's not debilitating pain. That's just an area of discomfort that goes away with movement.
Exactly.
And once they get through that, now they're in control. And then they have to learn the difference between this is discomfort and this is, I got a pulled muscle, I got something severe. But by reflecting on it, oh, that's different than my normal discomfort with arthritis. They then know how to adjust accordingly. So I can see where that understanding and recognition is very helpful, and that's an educational process that people have to go through. You just can't say, well, just know if it's pain or not. Well, how do you know? What is that? And that's what people need to be taught. What is and what is not discomfort versus pain that is somewhat dangerous. So.
Exactly. And you learn to recognize it, and you learn to respond in helpful ways, both physiologically and emotionally, right? So with mindfulness, you learn to recognize, oh, okay, I've felt this before. I am okay. I know that I don't have to stop and take myself out of whatever I'm doing. I can actually go through with my workout routine, and this is not dangerous to me. So that ability to label those sensations as something that is acceptable, maybe uncomfortable, but acceptable, then helps people not get stuck in those sensations, right? So instead of going, oh no, here it is again, this is going to ruin my life. This is preventing me from doing what I want to do. This is preventing me from staying healthy. This is so awful. Instead of spiraling out in that direction, you stop at, this is uncomfortable. I may not like this. It is okay for me to have this right now. And the best way for me to respond is to perhaps take some breaths and go through with my exercise routine, or, get up and go do whatever else was planning on doing.
You brought up an interesting point that you just gave that example is, we've been focusing on like the physical pain of recognition. There's also the emotional issues that, as you were describing the self-talk. Oh my gosh, I can't work out. I'm this. And all of a sudden that self-talk and those emotional dialogues going on can also cause physiological issues that are non-productive. And so it's also recognizing those as well, and then taking control of them. So when someone starts emotionally going out of control, like you were just describing, how do you teach them to reel it back in?
There's a step-by-step process that I teach people to go through, and it's an acronym I call FLAIR, with F standing for feeling, right? This is just that initial pre-verbal recognition. Okay, there is something going on. And then L for labeling. This is where you label your experience in a short, non-judgmental way. This is discomfort. This is unhelpful thinking. This is worry. And what that does is on an emotional level, it gives you a little bit of distance from the experience so that you're not getting stuck in it. And on a neurological level, actually changes the way that your brain is activating in that moment. By giving a label, a name to your experience, you're decreasing the activation of the fight or flight center in your brain, called the amygdala, and you are increasing the activation of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for emotion regulation and problem solving and rational decision making. So just that process of labeling gives you the ability to pause and reduce the intensity of the feelings in that situation, so that then you can go on and decide how are you going to handle the situation. So after L, you move on to A, which is allow, right? And this is where you're allowing your experience to be just as it is, rather than trying to get away from the pain, rather than trying to get away from anxiety, rather than trying to get away from anything in that moment. You say, okay, it is okay for me to feel this way. You allow the experience. And this cuts down on the fight and the struggle with something that you don't have control over. And then you're moving on to R, which is respond. And this is where you're choosing your response. Rather than going that automatic, autopilot with blindfold, you now have the ability to make a choice as to the most helpful way to deal with the situation. Let's say, you're experiencing pain, you are in the middle of your workout, and there you have some pain in your side that is uncomfortable. And you've felt it before, and you feel it. You label it as this is discomfort. It's okay for me to feel this way. And then for the R, for response, that you can take a few of those balanced breaths that will bring sufficient oxygen to your muscles, into your brain. Often that stitch in the side is actually due to overbreathing. So you know that you can balance your physiological condition at that moment, and that is the best way to respond to the situation. You don't have to permanently stop what you're doing. You just pause, you figure out how you respond, and then you move on. And then the final step in this process is the E, which is expanding awareness, right? So instead of being overly focused on this one uncomfortable sensation where it becomes all of your experience, oh no, this pain, and it's sort of overtaking me, you expand awareness to, okay, there is this pain, there is also, the person in front of me, and there is the floor that my feet are standing on, and, there is the air that I'm breathing, and there is my heartbeat. So you're expanding awareness to everything in your immediate environment, both internal and external, so that unpleasant experience, that pain, whether physical or emotional, becomes just a part of your experience. It's no longer all of your experience. And then it becomes a lot easier to have it be there without getting stuck on it.
Okay. That seems like a pretty pragmatic model that anybody could apply and use in situations. But it does take some practice and some learning, working with a practitioner that will help guide someone, rather than just walking around with a card saying flare on it. It takes a little bit more than that. So if someone were, how would someone know if they could benefit from the type of training that you provide? What are the issues or challenges that would say, this mindfulness biofeedback is really what I should be looking into?
Well, I guess technically all of us can benefit from better self-regulation and a stronger, better resilience. It's a pretty universal skill, but more specifically, there are two groups of people that would benefit the most. First, there are those that are struggling with particular psychophysiological disorders, perhaps headaches or chronic pain, arthritis, anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome, things like that. And then second, there are people who would like to learn what they do better. So learn to do what they do better. So improve in their professional activities and athletic endeavors, perhaps performance-based hobbies. And their approach is similar, but coming at it in a slightly different way. One is more of addressing a problem, and the other one is using existing strength and helping you use them in the most optimal way.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the strengths side? Because we've talked about the pain, eliminating those things. But if someone wanted to improve their performance, whether it be as an executive or as an athlete or as an artist, can you talk a little bit about how your approach would help them? Right.
Absolutely. So here we're going back to the ability of the mind and body to achieve optimal activation. For different activities, we need different amount of that physiological and emotional activation. Say if you're about to run a 400-meter sprint, the amount of activation you're going to need is quite different from the activation you need when you're giving a presentation in front of a room full of people. But you still need to be activated for both. And being optimally activated. So if you're not activated enough, you're not going to be able to perform well. If you're overly activated, you're not going to be able to perform well as well. You're going to feel, overly anxious or agitated. So the idea is that your body needs to find a sweet spot of activation that's necessary for the activity at hand. And thinking about it in concrete terms is really difficult. Well, how do I tell my body to activate itself in just a specific way, for my 400-meter dash? And then how do I tell it to activate for my big presentation? You can't really do that. And this is where biofeedback comes in. With biofeedback, you train your body to find that optimal level of activation. So through a consistent practice at neutral times, your body and your autonomic nervous system learn how to achieve that optimal level of power that you need, and of course also how to then optimally power down and recover afterwards without you consciously needing to do anything at all. And then with mindfulness training, you learn to recognize the sensations of that physiological and emotional activation as being helpful and adaptive, right? So rather than experiencing your rapid heartbeat and perhaps faster breathing and feeling a little bit sweaty before a big presentation as, oh no, I'm too anxious, I need to stop this, right? You learn to recognize it as, oh, this is my body doing what it needs to be doing. This is my body helping me prepare to do my best. And then you're balancing that ability of your body to come up with optimal activation, and you are allowing your body to stay at that optimal activation by recognizing that this is my body is doing what it needs to be doing. As a result, you remain at that optimal level of activation for your 400-meter dash or for the big presentation you're giving.
Okay, so it's during those neutral times, which would be like in sports, it'd be like during practice, mm-hmm. You actually go through the kinds of things you'll be doing in a game, and you do it repetitively, so you recognize, oh, this is right, nope, this is wrong, and you'll learn to self-regulate in those situations. So when those situations actually come up in competition or in a stressful situation, your body already knows how to do it, just like muscle memory. I mean, I play tennis, and mm-hmm. the way to get better at a backhand is to hit 500 or 600 backhands every week. Exactly. And you get better because as long as you're hitting it over the net, mm-hmm. And so it is that practice in the off times that allows you to be prepared for the situations you'll confront, in a competitive situation or in a high performance situation. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's even, some of it is even more basic than that. You do some of the practice at neutral times when you're not doing anything at all. You just, you are taking your time to practice your self-regulation skills, not on the court, not on the track, but just sitting in your chair, or on your couch at home, and doing your heart rate variability training, for example. And then when you are going out onto the court to practice your 500 backhands for the day, that training is already with you, and then you're also able to recognize in that moment if you're getting overly activated or if you're not activated enough, and you're able to make adjustments in the moment, and you practice how to do that in those neutral practice times. So when the time comes for competition, you're prepared both in that fundamental underlying where your body is working very much for you and in being able to achieve just the right level of activation, and then also knowing how to recognize if things are going a little bit off course and how to correct yourself.
Okay. Now, biofeedback and mindfulness have been around for quite some time, but many people may not understand them or may have some misconceptions about them. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people may have, and how do you help them overcome it?
Sure. Excellent question. There are two types of misconceptions. I think one is that biofeedback and mindfulness are just a cure-all. If you do a session of one or the other, all your problems are going to go away, which is really not the case at all. Biofeedback and mindfulness are both powerful, empirically supported skills. There is a really broad range of research supporting the use of both of them, but they're certainly not a cure-all. There are some things that biofeedback and mindfulness are appropriate for, and then some things that there is just no empirical evidence that they are useful. So it's important to be an informed consumer, using biofeedback and mindfulness for what they are intended to be used for, and doing so in a way that allows you to remain in charge. If you are seeing a biofeedback provider, they are not doing anything to you. You are the one that's in charge of your own training. Your biofeedback provider will be a guide. They will give you skills that you need, but it's going to be up to you to then take those skills and use them in the best possible way. And then on the other hand, there is a misconception that your mind and your body are separate and they're not really connected. And why would you work on how you're feeling emotionally when your leg is cramping up? Sometimes it takes a little bit of demonstrating just what happens physiologically. So I might hook someone up to the biofeedback equipment and ask them to think about something particularly stressful that has happened to them and show them the real-time change in their physiological function at that moment to show just how much our minds and bodies are connected. And I would often talk about the empirical evidence and the real changes that happen with biofeedback and mindfulness with those that are skeptical and think that mindfulness may be something that's wishy-washy and touchy-feely and too new agey. We have excellent evidence, imaging studies showing that mindfulness produces very real functional and structural changes in the brain as a result of practice over as few as 8 weeks. And the same thing with biofeedback. We have evidence of very real physiological functions, including improvement in cardiac function over as little as 6 to 8 weeks of practice. So talking about that, I think, is really important, that both of these are empirically validated, powerful tools that just need to be used appropriately.
Oh, thank you. Now, I'm sure that there are people out there who may want to work with a mindfulness-based biofeedback practitioner or provider, but aren't sure what to look for. Can you give some suggestions to our listeners about how they go about selecting the one that's right for them?
Absolutely. That's another excellent question. So if you want to find a provider who's board certified in biofeedback, and I highly recommend that to make sure that the person you're working with has the proper training, you can go to Biofeedback Certification International Alliance. It's bcia.org. They have a listing of all the board certified biofeedback providers in the US, Canada, all over the world. You can enter the area in which you live and you will get a listing of people who are board certified as biofeedback providers in your area. I suggest calling a few people and first assessing just over the phone, how does this person sound to me? How might they propose to address whatever issue I would like to work on? And then use the first face-to-face meeting to see what does it feel to be like in the room with this person? Because that connection, the rapport you have with the therapist is so incredibly important to good outcomes. If you are working with somebody who is very well trained in biofeedback, but you just don't have a good connection with them, you might not get nearly as much out of it as if you're working with someone that certainly knows what they're doing, and also you feel a strong sense of connection. So that test of what is it like to sit with a person in the room, I think, is very important, and that you can use that first meeting for that, and then decide whether you'd like to continue working with that person or whether you would like to check out someone else.
Great. That sounds like great advice. Now, if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about your practice, where should they go, Ina?
People can find me on my website. I actually have two. One is ipxboston.com, and that's one that's geared towards optimal performance, or bostonhealthpsychology.com, and that's my website that's geared a little bit more towards working with psychophysiological health-related issues. Both of these websites will have my contact information. I'm happy to answer questions, direct people to someone that can help or see whether I may be able to help.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I mean, you provided a lot of concrete information that makes something that seems maybe a little intimidating very down to earth and relatable for especially my audience of people over 50 looking for to improve their performance, manage chronic disease, or help manage stressful situations. So I really appreciate your time, your energy, and all the hard work you've done in this area. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed our conversation very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Never Too Late for Fitness Radio, hosted by Phil Ferris. To learn more about the guests or resources on our show today, or to listen to past episodes, go to nevertoolateforfitness.com.